data that is not quality data is harmful. It's not that it's meaningless. It actually damages the organization.
Welcome to Dev Interrupted. This is Conor Bronsdon. I'm Dev Interrupted's executive producer, and I'm here filling in for Dan Lyons as host today. And it's my pleasure to introduce Einat Orr, the co-founder and CEO of Treeverse. Welcome aboard here, Einat.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, thank you for joining us. And congrats. I saw you raise $23 million in Series A funding this year. Huge stuff you're doing. I'd love to start with giving the audience the opportunity to get to know you a little better. Can you maybe tell our listeners a bit about Treeverse and what you do there?
So I'm the CEO of Treeverse. We founded Treeverse 2 years ago now. It's like very close to our birthday. Like we're 2 years and 4 days.
Wow, congratulations. Yeah.
Thank you. So my co-founder, Oz Katz, who I've worked with at SimilarWeb, had this beautiful idea that we will talk about later. And he kind of convinced me that it's something we have to do. It was very easy to be convinced. I fell in love with the idea. And since I felt that it's something that I understand the customer, and I understand the product, and I understand the technology, that is something that I would love to do. And I joined him. And here we are 2 years later. We had somewhat of a fight over who is going to be the CTO.
Really? You wanted to be CTO?
Yes, he won. I was the CTO of every company I worked for in the last 15 years.
Okay.
So, but he won that debate, and I have to say I'm happy about it. First of all, because he's a much better CTO than I've ever been. And I really enjoy being a CEO. It's a very interesting change for me.
All right. I definitely have a couple of questions out of that. Like I would love to hear about what changes you've experienced and why you enjoy being a CEO so much. But beforehand, I just want to compliment you on your ability to say, hey, this guy is really good at this. I can let him be the CTO and kind of give that up. I know that can be really hard for people, particularly when you've been the expert on something for so long, to give that up. And it's a huge trait for leaders that's, I think, is important to be able to hire people who are better at you than certain things.
Thank you. Well, we were working together for 5 years before we started the company, and I trust him so much. I know his talent.
So talk to me a bit about this transition to being a CEO. It sounds like you love the transition. You feel like you're excelling this new role. What have the changes been like?
It was actually great. So because it's a startup, the CEO is a single contributor. So I went back to doing things that I haven't done in years. And being a single contributor is very creative and it's fun. On the other hand, while we scale now that we're growing very rapidly, I have the opportunity to shape the organization in a way that I think would make it a winning organization. And that is something I've always enjoyed when it had to do with R&D. And now I have the opportunity to do that over other domains as well. So I'm very excited about that. I learn all the time. So the fact that the startup is changing constantly and the challenges are changing and evolving, it's something that is very exciting for me. I enjoy it very much.
How big is your team now?
So we're now 20 and we are constantly hiring.
I know that feeling.
Around 50 at the end of the year. Very exciting.
Big growth stage. And I think that's a really interesting transition point too, because as you point out, like early on in the growth of the startup, you've had the opportunity to be very heavily involved in every aspect of what's going on. And that's probably going to change here as you hire, 30, 40 more people. How are you going to handle or deal with that transition?
My focus is on keeping the culture. So we do lots as a team to make sure every person that we hire buys into the culture. And then we invest a lot of time in making sure that people adhere to the culture in their day-to-day work. And I believe that if we keep the culture, we will be able to grow in a very healthy way. So I think processes, which I really believe in, comes because if you have the right culture, if people are positive about one another and trust one another and work as a team, then their ability to achieve things is really unlimited, especially with the amount of talent that we have in the company. We really have an amazing team.
That's fantastic. My producer's telling me I got to keep moving. We got a lot of questions to ask, but I really want to dig into this more because I love this idea of, I guess, not enforcing adherence to the culture, but encouraging and implementing it. How are you doing that kind of implementation of cultural adherence and making sure that it continues throughout the company?
First of all, we defined the culture from the company, from the team itself. So it wasn't that we came in and said, this is our culture, but rather we had a culture discussion and we asked ourselves, okay, who we are, what are the things that are really important to us that are working right now as a culture that we would like to keep? And we made those into very clear statements of things that we would like to keep. And then what the company should do in order to keep them. That was a list that we made. So if the company wants to keep that value that we currently have, those are the things that the company should do. And whenever someone comes in, we show them that, we explain, we show how we intend to keep the culture. We put a lot of emphasis on how important it is to work according to this culture. And up until now, it's been working very well. Everyone who's joins because of the culture, because it's also part of the hiring process. And then they're very enthusiastic about keeping that culture. So they become ambassadors right away.
So I'm really curious to get into more of the background of the business, because I think this lays a great groundwork for us, where you say, like, look, we're setting in processes in place. We're making sure that we have a strong culture for every hire that we're implementing. But there's a lot that goes into the business, and Treeverse is all about data. Can you elaborate on that?
There is a very big difference between teams who work on code and application to teams who work on scalable data. And the difference is, when I was the CTO of SimilarWeb, I was managing a very large R&D team, and I had a very big group that was running the application. So a web application with a very large database that they consume data from. And on the other hand, I had a very large and very talented group of data engineers that were managing the scalable data. And while within the application, you had CI/CD, you had Git, you had Jenkins, you had everything you needed in order to reduce the price of error, right? And run very quickly, fail when you need to fail, but being able to quickly recover from failure.
Fail fast and adjust.
All those things, right, that we know so well and that work very well for us and actually make the development process what it is today. And when I was looking at the data group, they had none of those, right? So they were managing their code in Git, of course, but the complexity of the data itself and managing the data around the pipelines while the data is constantly changing, that is a huge challenge. And this is where tools are missing. We're no longer in a world where you have one database and the data applications just querying this one database, right? And so we need more tools to make this environment manageable and to actually achieve what was already achieved in the applications world.
Yeah, I loved that in Treeverse's mission statement, you said to simplify the lives of data engineers, data scientists, and analysts who are transforming the world with data. And it's clear that you want to reduce those complexities around data retrieval today.
Yeah, exactly. So actually, today we're at a point where there are compute engines like Spark, Presto, and those are engines that actually allow you to query distributed data in an efficient way. You have a place where you can save huge amounts of data in a reasonable price. Those are the object storages, either cloud providers or open source like Minio. And then the next problem is, where is my data, right? Discoverability. And there's a huge trend of discoverability tools now. And then how do I manage it? So the metadata, the versions, the lineage, all those things are now becoming the problem of managing huge data environments. And if you're thinking, well, huge data environments is something that only huge companies have. So no.
Not anymore. Yeah.
Not anymore. And it's also not a certain vertical. It's not that just internet companies have huge amounts of data. Everyone has huge amounts of data. So this is a very common problem everywhere.
And I think that's a really good point, because like we're seeing this more and more, right? Where successful companies are becoming technology companies, and therefore they're becoming data companies in a lot of ways, where everyone has this massive influx of data, and it's more about like how you leverage it and use it. And the more important these tools become, where it's, hey, we're going to make this easier for you to use, because the amount of data doesn't matter if you can't use it. And I love that that's where you're focusing on.
Exactly. And if you're thinking CI/CD or data lifecycle management, so you want to be able to develop in a safe way. You want to be able to deploy the data, not the code, the data to production for consumers to use. And then you would like to manage the ongoing production of data to the organization, right? This is the production of the data in a way that is safe and allows reverts and allows debugging and so on. And all that data lifecycle management doesn't exist today in a comfortable way. Some organizations, the more advanced ones, have created those systems internally for themselves. But other companies just, run around with Band-Aids and hope for the best.
So I love the nuggets I'm getting out of your data conversations. It's great to hear the breadth and depth of what you're thinking with the space. Can you fill me in a bit more on where you see the data industry moving and where you see gaps in technology today with regards to managing data complexity and putting data into play for, both dev teams, consumers, everyone?
I definitely see a very big difference between the people who analyze the data for the organization, which are the analysts, and later on in a more complex organization or in a more complex model, the data scientists who are actually creating algorithms or training machine learning, and the skill set that those two groups have. There is a gap between that and the actual engineering needed in order to provide them with an environment that allows them to work in an efficient way. Because those are huge amounts of data. The systems who are capable of analyzing those amounts of data are complex distributed data. Also, by the way, ingesting those amounts of data. So the knowledge that you have to have in engineering in order to be able to work around this environment and install and maintain all those parts within the environments that are needed is a gap that the industry would have to close. And we can definitely see two very strong players trying to close it. It's Snowflake on the one hand saying we will be the database of everything. And then Databricks on the other hand saying we can provide you with everything, but we can also be part of a Lego where you choose other things and we run over an object storage as the data source.
It's really interesting to see how many companies are kind of taking this Lego approach, as you put it, where they say, okay, I'm going to be the Lego for, finance, or the Lego for data, where it's like, I'm going to let you use it the way you want to. And I think that kind of relates to stuff you've done, and particularly the open source movement, because I know you launched the open source platform LakeFS. Was that inspired by this Lego concept or something else?
So it was inspired by the problems that we had at SimilarWeb when we were managing petabytes of data. And we felt that we would like to have the security of developing an application when we develop an application that is based on huge amounts of data. And we were looking for ways to create CI and CD and testable data. And there were no tools around. And this is where Oz, my co-founder, actually came with the idea of we need something conceptual here, like code has Git. Data should have Git for the object storage and the data that is within it. So that was the inspiration. But from a strategic perspective, we thought two things. One, that this is not a winner takes all market. So I don't believe that tomorrow morning, one player is just going to provide all the needs for everyone. And that would be the end of it. I think it just continues to diverge. And it would take a very long time before it's going to converge. And I'm not sure what it's going to converge to. So being open source, having an open API, and being able to play very nicely with everything is a key to succeeding in this field. And this is why we chose to provide LakeFS as open source. And of course, as data engineers ourselves, with a very large data engineering team at SimilarWeb, we knew that it's a basic expectation of the engineers because this ecosystem is based on open source, right? Hadoop, and then Kafka, the Hive Metastore, and later on other tools, right? Airflow, for example. So the building blocks are all open source. Data engineers would have a basic expectation to try something with open source. Maybe later they will take a managed service, but the proof would have to be that it's open source. And again, that it plays very nicely with everything around, especially our open source LakeFS that should integrate with everything because it empowers everything with those Git-like operations that we haven't talked about yet.
Yeah, I'd love to get into that a bit more. So you kind of describe LakeFS as a Git for data or, a Git-like repository. Where do you see the platform going in the future?
So right now we provide those Git-like operations over object storage. So in the near future, I see us play a larger role in managing metadata in general. So we would probably be taking some of the functionality that the Metastore provides. But looking for really forward, we want to run over all data sources, not only the object storage. So imagine a data pipeline that starts with an object storage, but then also passes through data that is being read and written into a key value database. And of course, results that are written into an analytics database. And all this thing is managed by LakeFS in a way that you can, for example, revert a full pipeline, and it would be reverted on all data sources in parallel in one atomic action. Full control and manageability of the data pipeline, regardless of the actual data source.
So I'm not a data scientist, but I have to say, I love this vision of the data pipeline, right? Like the fact that you're thinking about how data flows from, start to finish, and the fact that LakeFS can apply across the board, I think is a very clear use case to someone like me who's not as deep in data. I'd love to define a couple of terms here that I hear a lot happening with, data conversations. I think they'll be important for us and our audience as we go forward. Can you maybe tell us the difference between a data lake, which I hear is probably the inspiration for LakeFS, and like a data warehouse, and how that applies within a data pipeline?
A data warehouse would be where data has a structure, a schema. This is where you save your data in tables in a way that consumers who are interested in insights of the data can read the data. Okay, so the data would go through a lot of processes before being saved to this warehouse, which is the single source of truth, and it is data that is already ready to be consumed. A data lake is just a place where you can very easily, very quickly write any kind of data. So the ingestion of the data is extremely easy because there is no schema expected, right? And once the data is there and it can consume huge amounts of data in a reasonable price, very important, you can then try and analyze it and see what you need and what you don't need, what you want to save, what you want to version, and what you want to actually provide to your consumers.
So you've created this vision in my head with this, where I see, a lake of data with a pipeline running from it to the data warehouse, where then everything's kind of being moved out. And that makes sense in my head. Am I accurate there?
So a lot of organizations have that architecture exactly. So that you're absolutely right. So the lake could be this phase before the warehouse, but some organizations have the warehouse also within the lake because the performance that they need as demanding, they don't need sub-second performance, and then they can enjoy the low cost and have those tables actually saved into the data lake and virtualized as tables by a Metastore, for example. And the performance of this is getting better and better, especially if you use dedicated tools. So it kind of competes with the separate warehouse, but still the traditional architecture that is extremely common is exactly what you imagined.
Can you maybe give me an example or case study of what you're talking about so we can think about it? Because I'm enjoying the abstraction, but I want to make sure our listeners have something like specific. When would a company be making these kind of changes with LakeFS, or changing from the style, like traditional model, to one where they have a data lake with a data warehouse within it?
So I think in order to do that change and move into a data lake or start with a data lake, you would have to be thinking you'll have scale. Now, scale doesn't necessarily mean scale in amounts of data, although as we talked about, very quickly, everyone has scale with data. It can also be scale with the number of outputs that you would be extracting from that data. So what is complex is the pipelines that you're running over the data, the number and the dependencies between them. That is a different kind of complexity that would also require high levels of manageability. And then the third would be a team. If you have a very big team of people that need to collaborate and they are using the same data set and something changes and one person changes something where another person didn't know that change was happening or doesn't think that change is needed, or they are looking for a snapshot of the data that was just destroyed, then the complexity of the work is high. So I would say those are the three dimensions that if one of them is already scaling, you would need to think of manageability, and you would want to be running CI and CD, or as we call it, data lifecycle management on your environment, just to ensure quality. And, data that is not quality data is harmful. It's not that it's meaningless. It actually damages the organization. Decisions are taken over data. If the data is not perfect and can't be trusted, the wrong decisions would be taken. So quality becomes harder to achieve and manageability becomes top of mind.
I think that's a really important clarification that you're making, where not only is data that's sitting out there and being used improperly an annoyance, it's something where it can lead you down the entirely wrong track. Your whole business may start going the wrong direction. And I know one of the things Lake FS does is help enterprises manage their data lake in a way similar to how they manage their code. Can you talk us through that?
Yeah. So what would you be expecting when you manage code is a few simple actions, right? You would like to develop something in isolation. And then you want, once you're happy, to merge it into your main branch and allow everyone to be exposed to that code. Of course, you would be doing testing before. And also you would like to automate that process, right? You would like to have the hooks or the ability to make sure that this is done frequently.
As much as possible, yeah.
So that is in development. So a data engineer would need exactly that, but over the data. But they would like to experiment on production data in isolation without needing to copy petabytes of data. That doesn't make any sense. It's error prone.
It's expensive.
And it's not an atomic action. It's not something that you can just do immediately. So they want to experiment with production data very quickly. They want to work in isolation. They want to be able to then merge their excellent results once they have validated that they are excellent into the main branch of the data and allow the consumers to use that. And all that is actually Git-like thinking, right? Over data instead of over code. You can continue with that example, looking into deployment and looking into production. You would want to revert. You would want to be able to open a branch of a problematic code, or in the case of data, or problematic data, and debug it. So this analogy works very well for people who know Git. It, of course, has its limits. Data is not code and code is not data. Yeah. But LakeFS is driven by this inspiration of allowing all those things that are actually data lifecycle management in a way that is similar to the way that code is managed in applications.
I think that'll really resonate with our engineering leadership audience. So that's a perfect explanation. Thank you. I do want to make sure we define a term here that I know we've been using a little bit that maybe we should just be clear on. So can you define for me what data versioning is? And I know you break it down into 3 categories. So I'd love to hear about each of those categories.
Yeah, so definitely data versioning means something else to anyone that you speak to. So if you look at the world, you have data versioning databases. So you have databases that actually include versioning within them, or data sets that include versioning within them. I put those 2 in the same bucket.
Okay.
I call it collaboration, but I'm not sure it's the best name. But those databases are databases, so they're limited and in the amount of data that they can save, and they are expensive. But they provide versioning, like Dolt Hub, for example. So it's a beautiful database, but you need to be willing to save all your data in the database. For myself as the CTO at SimilarWeb, it just wasn't an option. And then you have tools like Kaggle that simply give you data sets that are already versioned. You can go through versions of those data sets. So that's another world. The second group is the open table format. Here we're already in the world of data lakes. And when you save data into a data lake, you save it into a file. And that file could have a format. And the most common format for analytics now is called Parquet. And those open table formats work over Parquet, and they actually allow an evolution of the table. So they will allow mutability. You can now keep deltas of changes in your data, and you can have some sort of versioning of the table itself. One table that you have, or if you manage 100 tables, each one would be versioned separately. And you would have some sort of time travel, but it would be very limited to when you decide to just compact all that into one file that represents the present. Because otherwise you would be saving too many deltas. It would, for example, influence your performance. And then comes LakeFS that actually works beautifully with open table formats because it allows you to manage all those tables together. So if Iceberg or Delta Lake or Hoodie allow you to manage each table separately and you're managing all your tables in that format, LakeFS would say, look, let's look at all those tables as a repository. And now when we commit, we know the state of all the tables, and we then allow you to actually time travel between snapshots of your repository. Allow you to branch. That means to have different isolated environments of those data sets.
Right. We'll take a snapshot, we'll branch it off.
Right. So while the formats themselves can go forward and backward in time, I mean, forward to the point of today, they do not see the future. But good point. And LakeFS allows you to also move sideways in a sense, right? Because you can branch it.
And it sounds like it'll make your data more resilient and easier to manage.
Yeah, exactly. And it allows those Git-like operations, right? So it looks at everything as a repository. Think of the open table formats as being able to run Git over one file in your code base, while LakeFS allows you to look at the entire code base and manage it in a way that is always consistent, right?
Got it. What about like machine learning management of data?
So machine learning is definitely one of the use cases, is one of the use cases that is growing very, very quickly. And for machine learning, those Git-like operations are extremely important. In machine learning, there is a concept called experimentation management, for example. This is where you would like to know when you just performed an experiment on a model that you're building, you would like to know which data sets played a part in that experiment. So most experimentation management systems would just give you a path to those data sets, but they don't guarantee that the data set under this file, so they're sending you to a file name. They don't guarantee that file hasn't changed. They can't. If LakeFS is there, it would make sure that if the file changed, a new version of it was created, and then you really have experimentation management. So it's an infrastructure layer under those experimentation management tools that provides the real guarantee that your data is versioned.
What are some of the best practices that people should put in place with their data versioning?
So use LakeFS, of course. That would be really important. So what you see right now is people using, when they're really desperate for versioning, they would do it manually. And that is very dangerous. Because if you want to run a new job and you need to go and change within your code or within your configuration or within your Airflow configuration, the names of the files manually and make sure that they are all now accessing version 5, that is terribly error prone. And then we go back to that problem of getting outputs that are wrong because you forgot to change one of those 4s to 5. You now have a result, and the worst case, users are actually the ones that find out about the problem.
This is where you talk about, having data that doesn't work is worse than having no data.
Exactly. So this is the point where this has to be automated. It can't be manual. You need to be able to commit a set of files, know that this is the version, tag them with a logical name, being able to get back to them all together without their names all being 5, just because they belong to the same commit of their repository at a certain time point. So much easier, makes much better sense, right? And solves a lot of problems. I think the main thing with data versioning is that no one uses Git to version their code, right? So I think no one would really use LakeFS to version their data. They would be using LakeFS in order to get data lifecycle management that makes sense. The fact that their data has versions is just a fact of life that can't be ignored.
That's a great point. I love how you have this wonderful comparison with Git, and I think it really helps make sense of what LakeFS is doing. I love that simplification and clarification you're bringing. And my guess is that that's been informed a lot by your background because most backgrounds we see on this show are people who were all in on code, got their computer science degree and then got a doctorate in it, or did undergrad computer science and got an MBA. But you have a background in mathematics. How did math inform your career and getting to where you are and solving problems this way? So
I dealt mostly with optimization. And I think it's something that is within my nature. I can't see things that are inefficient. It drives me crazy. So it's not only mathematical optimization problems. It's also when I see people working together, and I think
it's just I was like, I shouldn't be on your team, huh?
Let's do that better. I mean, you don't have to do that in a nasty way. You want things to improve.
You want to iterate.
You want to iterate and you want things to be optimal. You never look at things and say, well, that's okay that I see why it could be better and I want to make it better. So, and I think that when I studied mathematics, I became very systematic in the way I think about things. And
this goes back to what you said earlier with processes, right?
Yeah. Very, very systematic. And that is very helpful. So when you're systematic in your thinking, you find a way to do things in a repeatable way.
I love this. I think this is a great nugget. And I think a lot of leaders on this podcast work to become more systematic in their thinking. I know it's something that I joke about, but I try to do in my personal life and my work as well. What are like key systems of thinking or improvement that you see as important to organizations? Since I know you mentioned processes earlier.
Well, I have to say that continuous improvement is probably the best process that you can ever put in. So
totally.
You want to have is those checkpoints, right? You need to measure yourself. That's key, right? So you need to understand how you reflect to yourself, how you're doing. And we do that as a team. We decide how we measure ourselves in a way that is helpful for us, because it's not done for someone else. It's not numbers that I'm showing anyone else. It's for us to have a better mirroring of where we really stand. And then if every 2 weeks, every 4 weeks, it depends on the department and on the way that you work, you stop and you think and you say, okay, let's retrospect on what we did so far. How is our assumptions looking like? Did we progress the way we thought we should? Blah, blah, blah. And conclude what should be done better and improve for next time. Let's have an experiment. Let's try doing this differently. Let's see if it works for us. If you are constantly in that state of mind, you win. Absolutely. And it doesn't matter how wrong were the assumptions at the beginning of the process, right? You could be awfully wrong. But if you tested yourself and you pivoted just a tiny bit and tested and pivoted again and then tested and so on, then you will find the right path to the right thing that it will bring you value and will bring value to the organization.
Yeah, I hear this talked about a lot as the learning mindset, right? Of saying, hey, I wanted to have this continuous improvement in my work and my personal life and how I approach the world. And to me, it sounds like something that is probably a huge strength for you as a CEO and a leader.
Yeah, I think it's embedded in my thinking. So everything is broken down to small things. We explicit things. And I think it's very important. So if things are implicit, it's very hard to understand what we did right and what we did wrong, because we did not make the assumptions explicit. So you have to make things explicit and then see if you can validate or disprove or and so on and move forward.
Do you feel like this focus on systems and processes lends you, obviously I think it's a strength for you, but do you feel like it ever is a weakness too, or gives you blind spots in your thinking?
So I think too many processes are definitely a problem, definitely in a startup. This is why I put the emphasis on the culture and of course on the continuous improvement process itself. And then the processes that we do have should be as lean as possible. So it's not that I love processes. It's just that I think that if you structure things, what you really need to structure, not everything, then it's really helpful for you in the way that you work. And if a process becomes unhealthy, then it should be removed immediately. Yeah. We try to minimize the processes. So it's not by belief the belief is not in process. The belief is in the process of continuously improve and then putting in the things that would assist us in doing that. And that would be a better way of putting it. And the tools are also just tools that help us do that.
I really like that as the core, right? Where it's so easy to become, a corporation where you have a million processes and it turns into red tape. But if instead the core value is continuous improvement and iteration and trying to maintain lean process around that, I think that is like the pivot for everything else, it sounds like.
Yeah, but I'm sure that as scale goes up, and I'm talking about hundreds of people and thousands of people, then something put into play, right? But you should always aspire to minimize, I think.
I think it's the challenge, right, of scaling an organization to become really large. I want to back up to the culture you've been talking about. So obviously learning, iteration, continuous improvement is a key cultural value. What were the other key cultural values that you put in place and are ensuring that every other employee has on board with them?
So one would be that we are part of the community because we are an open source project and we are actually establishing a community around this project, but we also want to be part of other communities, open source communities, and also the community around us as people, because we really believe in that. So seeing others and collaborating with others. We are a team, and it means that we trust each other, we're authentic with each other, and we show solidarity. So if someone is having a hard time, we help them, not necessarily personally, but personally and professionally. And, if someone needs backup for something, I think the most beautiful thing we see is when on our own call rotation is that if someone needs a replacement, it's like there are always like 5 people who volunteer to assist.
That's really cool.
Yeah, it shows the solidarity that people have for one another. Of course, we aspire to excellence. Excellence is very important to us. We want to see the best professionals with us, and we want to make sure we help them grow. So the company, this is also one of our values, is committed to the personal growth of the employees within work hours and out of work hours.
That sounds like a great work environment.
Thank you. And I think when you say it, it sounds like a lot of other work environments, but when you really come in to our team, you see that it is unique in a lot of ways, and it's very, very genuine. This is really what is happening in the team.
I know you mentioned you're hiring right now too. If folks are listening to this and they say, this really resonates with me, this solution sounds super interesting, I want to work on this, where could they go to find out more?
So on our website, treeverse.io, and we're really looking for, of course, developers, by the way, globally. So in the US, in Canada, in Israel, everywhere, but also a product manager, a UI UX expert, a social media person. So
yeah, if you're listening to this, check out Treeverse, reach out to Einat. I think there's some really cool opportunities there. And another thing that I want to mention is that I love not only the mindset and approach you're taking to this, but the gusto, right? Like we see within the tech industry, there's a lot of men who are CEOs, and it's more rare for someone to be like a female CTO and then a CEO. Do you have any advice for, young women who may be listening to this podcast and getting inspired and thinking, hey, I want to be a technical founder myself?
Just do it. Don't let the voices in your head that tells you that you can't or you shouldn't or it's going to be too hard, or just don't listen. Just do it. Come as you are. I really love that, and do it.
And I think probably not just the voices in your head, but the voices outside of you too. Like go try it. Like to your point, it's better to try something and start from a terrible assumption and then like change and iterate on it than to not try it or to just stick with that assumption.
Exactly. And the assumptions, the bias with women is to assume that others don't believe they can do it, or they don't believe they can do it. So this is the assumption they should find.
I love that. So I've got a couple fun questions here to close us out. You were a fantastic guest speaker for us at our Engineering Leadership Conference, Interact, back in September. Thank you for joining us for that. Our second iteration is going to be April 7th, and I hope the folks who are listening will join us for that as well. And thank you again for presenting. You were awesome. So I got to ask, what was your favorite part about that presentation and that panel? It seemed like everyone on it was having a great time.
Yes, because those are really talented people, and I loved everything that they said. It was very interesting for me to hear others and the way that they think about the problems and the unique way. You think like there's a way to do it. Everyone knows how to do it. This is the way to do it. But no, people are doing stuff in different ways and getting to really interesting results and shaping very different organizations by those choices that they take, either really technically from a processes perspective, but also from a cultural perspective there's no good and bad. It's just different. So it's just so inspiring to hear those other people talking and answering the questions.
Yeah. And I think to your point, it's also an opportunity to learn, right? Like we spend so much time involved in what we're working on it. And it's important sometimes to zoom out and say, oh, look at these other solutions, these other angles people are taking on it. And you can learn a ton from that. And I definitely recommend anyone who's listening who hasn't already seen that panel. Einat has some amazing things to say, and there's other incredible speakers from Big ID, Insights, and elsewhere. It's up on our YouTube at Dev Interrupted, Inspiring Engineering Leaders. Highly recommend. Great conversation. The last question I had for you is a fun new segment we're doing where we kind of dig into business decisions and say, okay, let's think about something that's maybe more abstract that maybe you won't ever face, but I want to see how you as a leader and someone who iterates thinks about this and what your approach is. If I gave you this choice between, would you rather your company only work 3 days a week and everyone has, 4 days off, or every employee took 3 months off a year, how would you approach that? How would you think about that? What do you think is a better option?
Well, since you gave me only 2 options, it would be very hard to iterate, right?
I'm forcing you in here. I'm sorry. Yeah.
Not from 4.5 days and then get to 3 because it's optimal. So,
yeah.
But I do prefer that one. So I would go for working 3 days a week because I think continuity is extremely important. I think that if you leave something for 3 months, you really lose context completely. And that might be difficult then to ramp up back. While if you are having a balance, a work-life balance is always very important. By the way, also one of our values. Then maybe we're not used to 3 days of work as being work-life balance, but it might be a very good work-life balance. And then you have the continuity. I mean, you're still in things. You're still in the motion of doing them. You're still committed to them. And then I think the efficiency is high, although there is a very, very good balance between work and personal lives.
Yeah, I think that's a really good way to think about it. We do like to give our guests an opportunity to close out the podcast with a call to action. So what do you want the engineering leaders and developers and team members listening to take away from this conversation?
Continuously improve and make sure your data is managed properly.
Short, simple, and check out LakeFS. I got to say, I love everything you're chatting about here. It's been really fascinating to hear about what you're working on, and definitely check out LakeFS and Treeverse if you're looking for a new role. It sounds like there's plenty of exciting stuff happening there with a really cool culture. I do want to give a quick reminder for our listeners. If you haven't already rated and reviewed the show on your podcasting app of choice, particularly Spotify or Apple Podcasts, Spotify just added ratings. Please go do so. It really helps us, as reviews are a crucial way that our show gets discovered. And be sure to join the Dev Interrupted Discord community. We have conversations all week, like the one today, talking about data, what's happening in engineering, and the future of tech. And then I also want to say thank you to the more than 2,000 of you who are now subscribed to our weekly Interruption newsletter. We're bringing you articles from the community, inside information on our weekly podcast, and the first look at Interact 2.0. It's going to be April 7th, 2022. I'm so excited to be there with all of you. And we'll have links to all this and Treeverse in the description below. See you next week. Annette, thanks so much for coming on.
Thank you. It was my pleasure.